everybody, and welcome back to the Trader Newsroom. The election is almost upon us, and earnings season is in full swing. I'm here. My name is Michael DeJoyer, the Director of Educational Services here at Trader, joined by my co-host, Joe Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at NASDAQ, and she's going to be gallivanting all over the world. So welcome, Jill.
Well, great to see you as always. Yep, we have it'll be interesting to get the perspective in other areas of the world over the next couple of weeks, and we'll have some fun stuff to report back.
That's great, Jill. Awesome. So let's just jump right in. We saw that we're now pretty much in this was like the first juicy week of earnings season, but really things are just about to pop off next week. Needless to say, we saw Tesla with a strong beat. We saw IBM, which, they rarely miss, and they had a miss, and that dragged on the Dow Jones Industrial Average a little bit. So we're right in the heart of earnings season. We had JP Morgan that was a little bit stronger than expected. And what are some other earnings trends that you see coming in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, well, of course, a big part of what we're reporting on in the markets is, macro and of course election related. I think, that's really what the theme is going to be, even though we're getting into the thick of earnings season next week. I mean, you have, a big constituent of the NASDAQ 100 Mag 7s reporting. I think, what's always interesting with Q3 earnings heading, part of Q4 on the calendar is there guidance seems to be tightened up a bit more. When you're listening to first quarter earnings or Q4 that takes place in Q1 because of the way the fiscal calendar works, it's hard to forecast as much in the beginning of the year and get a sense of the business relative to is at the end of the year. So I think it's interesting to hear from the beginning to the end of the year, perhaps how management commentary has changed or how how it has lived up to the guidance that was presented at the end of the year. I think what's interesting is because there's been so much leadership from the Mag 7, and even though the small caps like caught up or earlier in October, they're just not able to hold that run. Mike, you and I have spoken about this a number of times.
Yep.
So I'm curious to see if that momentum continues with the large cap names. I mean, longer term, it's not like they're going anywhere, but I think there's a couple schools of thought here. If small caps are moving because they're counting on rate cuts, which we know are coming, that's not a surprise. I think because the economy is still doing well, right? That is something more to celebrate than just, rate cuts coming to the market. So there's a lot of double-edged sword stuff happening in the market. And I think, and I'm sure we'll get into this, is okay, once we get the election out of the way and there's some sort of clarity, right? Whether it's an expected result, not an expected result, what the transition in power looks like. At least there's some uncertainty removed because we've gotten through the election, and then we'll debate what the next issue is from there.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we're going to talk about this when we get to the market analysis phase. But yeah, we did break a little bit of a trend line on the way up. That was what, kind of, I mean, there was other reasons that were triggering the sell-off that we had yesterday and on Monday. But, there's a couple of things technically going on that the market seems to be running into some major resistance right in front of the next talking point. We are at the end of the election cycle, and we've been talking about this election volatility. It's less than 2 weeks away. It's going to be interesting for you being out of the country during an election. That certainly is going to be something new. But we have the election 2 weeks away. What sectors do you think will be winners and losers depending on who wins? What do you what do you see in the cards in terms of sector analysis?
So I think a lot of it is going to depend on not so much as who's in this seat, but what the expectations of the market are. I mean, really policy is dictated in terms of the composure of the legislature, right? If it's all Republican, Democrat, or somewhat of a mix, obviously markets like when there's a mix with lawmakers because it suggests that there'll be stalemates and there's not too much of a change. I think the biggest things that the market will be focusing on for sure, and there's other issues there, but what's going to happen with corporate tax and other policies that's related to more of the financial economic side. There are other one issue votes, such as abortion is an example, what's happening with the border. But in terms of what the market is thinking, and especially if you can imagine you're trying to provide guidance and you're trying to, figure that out going into next year and you don't know what your tax rate is going to be, it's got to be challenging. Even on, the corporate level, you have to have these and or scenarios.
Yep. So we saw Elon Musk come out really strong on the side of Donald Trump. I mean, it's that, do you think that has, I mean, for the most part, is that kind of a balancing act between the left and the right, that you have one tech mogul coming out on the side of Trump, where you've had a number of other, tech moguls kind of always in the past supporting the Democratic side? Is there something is that a new dynamic, or is that just a personal thing that you think that Elon has some personal reasons behind him coming out so strongly for Trump?
I I would um I would imagine it's probably more, well, I mean, I wouldn't say personal as well, but I mean ideological, right?
Hmm.
Musk is clearly from what I can tell, well, he's definitely like Trump and where he's very transactional,
Hmm.
but he um less regulation within the businesses, which is typical. I think what's interesting with Musk is as much chaos as it can create as a shareholder or just in the social settings in general,
Hmm.
because he's so intertwined in terms of the space program
Hmm.
and the amazing things that SpaceX is doing, and the satellites provided and other humanitarian aid that comes as a result of it. It's really a double-edged sword.
Yes.
What does that mean if Kamala gets in? Do you cut off your nose to spite your face just to not work with him
Hmm.
and lose some of those opportunities? I don't know. But I
Yes, it's
think
very interesting. It's an interesting dynamic,
right.
because I know Jeff Bezos also has a space project that he has lost a number of contracts to Musk in the past and to SpaceX. So it's definitely, I guess, a calculated risk coming out so strong on the side of Trump.
I would guess so. I honestly, like I
Yeah.
said, they tend to be very transactional,
Yeah.
and flip script on things. So I don't know. I guess it's anyone's game.
It's anybody's game at this point. So let's jump into what's on the wall of worry post-election. So right now, I mean, obviously, the Fed meeting is right after the election. We've already entered into the Fed blackout point. So I guess last Friday, where we've also had a little bit of a sellout, we had a lot of Fed news. But has the Fed won the war on inflation, in your opinion?
I think, I don't think anyone's identified it as the no landing, the soft landing, the hard landing. Certainly, it's not a hard landing. I think while the data shows that they're getting it under control, day to day, myself included, even though inflation may be down year over year or quarter over quarter, it's always coming back to what did this look like before COVID, and things are 20, 25%, 30% more expensive, whether it's rent, whether it's insurance, whether it's, consumer staples. I heard an interesting report this morning that big box retailers like Target, they're actually doing more discounting this year, heading into the holidays. So I'm wondering, perhaps some retailers might have used inflation as a way to either increase prices or shrinkflation to improve margins. I don't know. This is just speculation on my part. But the average person, they're not thinking of it in terms, they don't care quarter over quarter that it's, went 0%, that there was no increase. They're still thinking about how their lives are 25% more expensive,
Yes, yes. I mean,
you
yeah,
know.
we're talking that we've gotten inflation within the 2.5, percentage range, but at the end of the day, over the last
Television.
couple of years, we've had a big drop. I mean, we had a big increase in inflation of 25% of products that you used to buy. They're 25% more. So that certainly is affecting everybody's pocketbooks. Needless to say, talking about wars, we still have the war raging in Israel, and the war raging in the Ukraine. the markets don't seem to be concerned or have not seemed to be concerned. And do you think that the election outcome will affect these wars in any way?
Well, I think, the election is overshadowing everything that's happening within Israel and Ukraine because they are so highly contested. The talking points are like, why are we sending money there when we have issues home and all the nuances associated with that. I would imagine that's not going to be brought up unless it has to be because it's a talking point that neither one of them want to address. I haven't heard um, anything on that, heard more on, the border, what's happening with the border wall. Um,
Immigration, abortion, that's
Right. I'm hearing
economy.
more about that. It's hard to justify why so much money is going there. This is a political perspective, not, like the strategic reasons why we have it going. It's a different conversation,
Mhm.
but it's not easy to have when you're trying to get the constituent vote, right, and support. So I wish, and it's highly disappointing that they haven't spoken on fiscal policy in terms of what's happening with national debt.
Mhm.
And I think these kinds of talking points are easy for them to communicate when you talk about the economy and inflation and abortion and the border wall and so forth and
Yeah.
immigration. Whereas the complexities of fiscal policy and what it means when interest rates fluctuate and when we add on more debt, it doesn't have those quick and dirty talking points like other areas. But if when I think about it, I'm more concerned about what's happening from the fiscal side than I
Hmm.
am with the Fed side.
Yeah.
Because the fiscal side, that opens up that has a more systemic impact than,
Without a
necessarily
doubt.
what's happening with the Fed,
I
right?
mean, you brought up a good point, and it's on my wall of worry as well. Government shutdown. I mean, we repeatedly face these government shutdowns, and I mean that has a huge impact how the government spends. That also affects the U.S. dollar. We see gold, which you and I have been all over gold for
Mhm.
years. I mean, literally, you and I have talked about gold repeatedly, as well as
Mhm.
cryptocurrencies. But certainly that has had a big effect on the price of gold and on crypto. Is that the fact that our government continues to overspend and we have this kind of looming debt crisis. So
Yeah. Well, Mike, you know what I think the other thing is too, we keep having these government shutdowns and we've had the most impotent Congress. I mean, the amount of legislation that went through, I believe, is at an all-time low, right?
yeah.
And there's such frustration with the lawmakers, and I think people are just tired of not being able to get things done. At the end of the day, these lawmakers are there to reflect the needs of their constituents, which is why voting on the local level, whether it's a school board, municipalities, county, state, is almost more important than anything on the national level because those are
Yep.
the people going to represent you.
Yep.
So, the president, whoever gets in, he's or she is not making the law. It starts from the local level down in terms of what um, legislature and regulation looks like. And I think that is an incredibly important message. And I hope that's something that gets out as we go through it this time around.
I mean, you're 100% right because I live here on Long Island, right near Queens,
Mhm.
literally across the street from Queens. And I try to stay out of Queens all that I can because they've installed like 2,000 new cameras. And I drive in Long Island with no problem. I don't have to worry about, constant speeding tickets. But I mean, also just the quality of life, just crossing that Jericho Turnpike into the other
Yeah.
side, which is Jamaica Avenue. It is like night and day in terms of how I feel from a quality of living perspective. So that's why
Mhm.
local, and I think a lot of people have felt the same way, that their quality of life is much more affected by local politics than on the national level.
I had this conversation, not to get too much in the weeds with that, but I just had this conversation on Tuesday, and somebody was asking me like their sidewalk was repaired 3 times in 2 years, and nothing has changed. They don't know where the money came from, and the problem is there is lack of accountability and transparency.
Yeah,
Um, and 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 this is why it's important to be involved. And if you
absolutely.
go to city council meetings, ask to see the numbers and get involved. You have to fix it from the bottom up.
From the bottom up, I totally agree. Well, thank you so much, Jill,
You're
and have
welcome.
safe travels. All right.
Thank you. Take
See you
care,
in 3
everyone.
weeks. Bye
See
bye.
ya.
All right, we're gonna jump to the charts here. All right, so here we are. We have my dash trader up. I'm just gonna bring up the QQQ, and I'm gonna show you what I believe is a trend line break. So, if I go to my trend tool on the NASDAQ 100, which represents the QQ, is represented by the QQQ, I'm going to put a trend line right in here. And if you draw this, so there is the main trend line. Okay, but if you update that trend line on the most current trend, so we put this to the new anchor. We broke a trend line there. So there you go. You could see that there is the break of the trend line. We also, this is not the major trend line. So if you break this major trend line, I'm just going to put in a horizontal line. So here is a horizontal line right down here. That would be the next break level. So if you break the trend line at 485 on the QQQ, the next level down is 477, 475 area. Next level down is 471. And then you have a next big level down, which, I mean, that's the big juicy move, is from 471 down to 488. Now, obviously, whatever happens with the election is going to have a big impact on what the market is doing. But this is kind of it could be a pause in an uptrend, certainly a pause in an uptrend, or it could be an N-shaped pattern, which would be the cursive letter N. So this would be the curl, the V pivot, and then if it breaks these trend lines successively, certainly if you get between 477 and 471, that is something to take note of. Let's just jump to Tesla TSLA. Now, I question, whether or not Tesla's big rally on earnings has something to do with the election or not, meaning that by the fact that Tesla and certainly Elon Musk has come out so much in favor of Donald Trump, the fact that that their numbers were good and that their forecasts were good, is that somehow impacted in or being reflected in which way the market thinks the elections are going to go. But that is just mere speculation. Here is the S&P at all-time highs, the SPY. We have Apple, AAPL, which certainly has not come out yet, but it has that same QQQ kind of, I'm going to say that's an N-shaped pattern. Currently, it's still a V, but if it does break that trend line, that is something to watch out for. Ray. Right. I would also wonder if, some of these tech companies that have come out strongly on one side on the other. Certainly, I know Meta has a reputation for coming out on the other side. Certainly, Mark Zuckerberg had put a lot of money into the previous election. But certainly, we're going to be watching companies like Meta, AAPL. We're going to be watching Google, GOOG, right? Certainly, Google has already gotten some of the wind taken out of its sails. But needless to say, we got a lot to look out for in the near future. So stay up to date with all things DAS. Sign up for our monthly newsletter. Fill out the form at the bottom of the webpage at www.dastrader.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Dash Trader TV. For our new DAS newsroom reminders. We are coming up to our winter traders competition, which will be coming in the end of November, early December. So certainly stay up to date on all things DAS for that. Follow us on social media at LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and we'll see how the election goes. God bless America.